Which late celebrities are treated like saints but were truly awful people when they were alive? Michael Landon. He did amazing in Little House on the Prairie, but apparently he was actually a raging alcoholic, and even his own kids made a documentary about the father I knew. He played wise, kindly characters on TV like Charles Ingalls on Little House on the Prairie and Jonathan, a literal angel in Highway to Heaven. And a lot of people seem to think he really was actually that saintly in real life, and he could be quite kind sometimes. He adopted his first wife's children and initially treated them like his own kids, even though he was barely 12 years older than the oldest boy, but he had a cruel, almost sociopathic side too. He eventually left his first wife and married someone else, which isn't that unusual in Hollywood. He adopted his second wife's daughter, and initially treated her the same as his biological kids, which he had several of. However, he then left second wife and family for a much younger woman who worked on the Little House set, and then he publicly stated that he never really loved his second wife, which absolutely broke his children's hearts. He then told his kids that if they didn't accept his new wife with open arms, he'd have nothing to do with them. He had 2 kids with his third wife and left the bulk of his estate to them, and very little to any of the kids from his previous relationships. It's like Michael Landon could only love certain people at certain times. Once he moved on, he gave all his love to the new people in his life and treated the people he supposedly once loved as if they never really mattered to him at all. Story 2. Mother Teresa was made into a literal saint. Supposedly, she was a shrew. She was originally known for running the Kalagat Home for the Dying in Kolkata. It was described as a place that cared for poor people who had terminal illnesses. Lots of former staff and nurses there have come forward to say that in reality, the house had many patients who were ill from very treatable conditions, some who could have recovered with very simple treatment, but they were refused treatment because they were meant to suffer like Christ did. Her charity brought in millions in donations, but refused healthcare for people who could have been saved or could have provided comfort for truly terminal patients. But instead, everyone was deliberately subjected to pain and suffering because it was her belief. Then when she became famous, she visited tons of rich and powerful people. She accepted money from murderous fascist leaders. She encouraged governments of poor countries to make termination illegal and ban contraceptives like rubbers. She insisted God would take care of them. But of course, we know that this actually sank many countries further into poverty and prevented women in these countries from gaining any rights. She essentially exploited poor people around the world to bolster her position in a cult of death. Christopher Hitchens said it best. Mother Teresa was not a friend of the poor. She was a friend of poverty. Man, this reads like a Netflix show. I had no idea. Story 3. Pablo Picasso was a cruel, raging narcissist who sucked the life out of people around him. His muses were generally young women he'd domineer and destroy. In the 1960s, my painting master lived and showed in Paris and was a part of the gallery scene there. He had the opportunity to meet Picasso a number of times. He said that he greatly respected Picasso as a painter, but despised him as a human being for the way he treated people. It was apparently common knowledge that one of his muses displeased him, and he put a cigarette out on her face. I remember reading an article once on a plane en route to Portugal. It was an article discussing the memoirs of Pablo, from the point of view of his grandson whom he treated with scorn and disinterest. One particular example that stands out is when he used to play a cruel or insulting game called Figs, where he would make his grandchildren guess where the figs were, before giving them the figs. The actual game is not an insult, but in a way is, as figs is like a pity gesture, usually used to mock people as if the game instigator is better or more intelligent than the players. He was a total piece of crap. Pulled from his wiki, Picasso has been commonly characterized as a womanizer and a misogynist, being quoted as having said to one of his mistresses, Françoise Gillot, "Women are machines for suffering." He later told her, "For me, there are only 2 kinds of women, goddesses and doormats." In her memoir, Picasso, my grandfather, Marina Picasso, writes of his treatment of women. Of the several important women in his life, 2, Marie-Therese Walter, a mistress, and Jacqueline Roch, his second wife, took her own life. Others, notably his first wife Olga Kolkova and his mistress Dora Maar, succumbed to nervous breakdowns. His son Paolo developed a fatal alcoholism due to depression. His grandson Pablito also took his own life when he was barred by Jacqueline Roch from attending the artist's funeral. A case of a man who was as wonderful at his craft as he was terrible to the people around him, it seems. Story 4. Steve Jobs was an a-hole to his family. His own kids hated him, his wife only stayed for the money. He also was known for throwing work colleagues under the bus to cover his own and taking credit for things he didn't invent. He also smelled like crap, and the icing on the cake, he was such a self-centered person that he refused treatment for pancreatic cancer for 9 months because his special diet of only apples or some crap would cure him. I find it hilarious that such a supposed genius passed by being so stupid. Jobs had a rare form of pancreatic cancer where it is curable with a 90% success rate. Fun fact, Steve Jobs didn't invent a freaking thing. He was a great businessman, mean, greedy, rude, arrogant, the usual stuff, and knew how to sell something to a certain type of consumer. Lots of interviews out there of companies he bought and would integrate into Apple. Most of them are really terrible painting of Jobs. That's who he was, so most are considered accurate. He purposely pit his employees against one another for his own benefit in terms of innovations, while one set of employees would suffer from the other's success. He also had a very narcissistic view on his devices. He purposely made his own kind of screw for his devices and did crap like gluing bits together and stuff because he didn't want people cranking open his devices when they were the ones who paid for it and owned it. He was a very shrewd and cunning businessman, pretty cutthroat. Dude also had a kid that he never publicly claimed, if I remember correctly. The way he treated his first daughter, Lisa, was horrible. Her mother had to sue him for child support and Lisa had to get a DNA test. Even after the conclusive DNA test, he maintained that 28% of the male population could be her father, basically shaming her mother. From Lisa Brennan Jobs' book, many of the slights and insults were petty and intentional. He wasn't a good dude. He wasn't an inventor. He probably bullied a lot of small businesses and actually good inventors into ruin as well. Apple, with Jobs at the helm, was well known for stealing intellectual property ideas and then suing them into the floor with a massive bucket of money that Apple had accrued selling Macs, iPhones, etc. He had an antisocial personality disorder. Those range from things called narcissism to things called psychopathy. I don't know where he ranged in that scale, but he was somewhere. The guy was Mr. Corporate Baddie by any standards. He gave no care whatsoever. He'd occasionally throw out some trite soundbite but never actually did anything other than grow a techno cult of his own creation. When he was invited back to Apple, he instantly canceled all of their philanthropic programs and never reinstituted them even when Apple were making billions in profits per quarter. He was just another gray-suited walker. Prestigious men. Story 5. John Lennon. He was cruel to his wife and son. His son absolutely hates it when people tell him how awesome or cool his dad was. My wife met John Lennon's son in London. Well, the outskirts. He was selling off some memorabilia of his father's. He sold everything dirt cheap. He barely advertised it too. He just posted it on a semi-popular Beatles blog. Not many people were there at the sale. She got a small Lennon statue for £120, which got valued at over £800 by a local collector. From what I understand, he wanted nothing to do with it. He doesn't see his dad as a god like some do. I vaguely remember watching him talk about it in a doc or something years ago. To everyone else, he was just a celebrity who made music people liked. In reality, he was a person with substance and anger problems that he took out on his family. If I remember correctly, and I very well may not, Julian bought back a bunch of memorabilia just to have a piece of his dad that he probably should have been entitled to anyway, including the lyrics to Julia. He did auction some of it off, though. I'm not sure how Sean felt about his dad, but John seemed to at least try a little bit harder with him than with Julian. Poor Julian. Yoko is and was a witch. Her and Sean Lennon received royalties estimated around $200 million, while Julian was completely left out because he wasn't in John's will for some reason. A decade or so ago, he sold a stake in the Beatles song he owned or was attached to, and now is worth like $50 million or something. Yoko is just something else. He used to be good friends with an ex-close friend of John Lennon, and he would tell stories about forging his signature in guitars and other random memorabilia to sell for substance money. Made me wonder how many fake John Lennon items are floating around this particular guy. He's dead now. Rest in peace. He's also semi-famous or notorious and had a movie made about him, but don't want to call him out, lol. Story 6. Thomas Edison. Literally one of the biggest pieces of crap. Stole patents, stomped out competitors with physical force and violence, electrocuted an elephant to mislead the public. His inferior power grid was less dangerous than Nikola Tesla's and a lot more. He had an army of lawyers helping him file patents, but the amount of interference files from him are astounding. Not only did he steal file patents, he would sue the crap out of the original patent filers if they tried to fight him. Edison can suck it. I don't understand why they still teach that Edison invented the light bulb when it was J. Swan. When I was in college, my professor told us that he used to send thugs down on the trains to Florida to literally destroy movie sets where they were using light bulbs that threatened to spending patents, bulbs that didn't even have patents yet, simply because he claimed they were his and unpurchased. Psychotic. I discussed Louis Leprance, the man who created the first motion picture camera. Do you know his name? No? Well, there's a testament to what Edison could do. He vanished off a train, taking him to American investors to sell his creation, taking his patents with him. What happened a few years later? Edison announced the creation of the first motion picture camera. Of course, this is false, as we have the earliest film Leprance created, which was of a garden party. In it, you can see his mother, who passed before Edison's creation, solidifying that this was the first. His son took Edison to court, but the court ruled in Edison's favor. Shortly after, Adolphe Leprance was found shot while duck hunting. We do not know if this is an accident or murder, but I tend to lean towards the latter, especially after what happened to his dad. In every sense of the word, I believe Edison had something to do with what happened to the Leprances, and it appalls me that he got away with such things. Suing people based on lies? That's just a big no-no. Oh, and since you're already halfway through the video, why not hit the like button and subscribe to my channel? Story 7. Frank Sinatra. Knew more than a few musicians who worked with him. He was a right jerk. Clear back to his Doorsy days. Exponential amount of tantrums on and off the stage. Just not a nice human. And an ego too big to contain in a room. I worked with his daughter. She takes after her dad. One night, Frank Sinatra and Ava Gardner drove around a random small town in California, I believe, shooting windows of storefronts and generally being drunk a-holes. Nothing ever happened because Frank Sinatra was famous. That was from Ava's book, which came out after she passed. He also helped the mafia to get Kennedy elected by basically forcing the coal miners' unions in West Virginia to vote for Kennedy, because the mob was in control there. He also went through women like he did with pairs of socks and treated them about as well. And after having been someone who was an activist for equality and racial justice, then turned around and started being one to one of his good friends, Sammy Davis Jr., during a series of shows they did because the crowd loved it. He also screwed over Tommy Dorsey once he started to get big and wanted to do his own thing and was apparently insufferable and narcissistic in the studio. And yet he almost single-handedly ended segregation in Las Vegas. Great friend of Nat King Cole and Sammy Davis Jr., and when they weren't going to get the same treatment as him at Vegas hotels, he refused to play there anymore. Sinatra refused to play for segregated audiences even in the 1940s. People are complex. They can be a-holes and also do good things. No secret at all he was friends with the mob. There are a lot of pictures of him with them. He was asked about it and said, "They were the only guys that would hire me to sing in their clubs at one time. They didn't turn their back on me, and I won't turn my back on them." That being said, at one time it wasn't considered that big of a deal to know someone in the mob if you were in show business and played the clubs because they owned them. A lot of people that grew up in New York, Chicago, etc. often knew a mob guy. Story 8. XXXTentacion was a piece of crap. I hate it when people treat him like some kind of saint. He was horrible to his pregnant girlfriend. He deserved to be in prison, not 6 feet underground, being worshipped by teenagers who don't know better and ultimately dodging the consequences of his actions. To this day, it still baffles me how so many people could glorify him and treat him as a saint after what he did. He's a special case. I think most normal people recognize this guy was complete scum and his death was a result of his past actions catching up to him. It's only his rabid fanbase who still try to paint him as some sort of misunderstood guy who was good deep down inside. I'll admit it did seem like he was trying to change towards the end of his life, but again, it doesn't erase the things he already did. Even if you're moving on from your past, doesn't mean others are. This guy used to post videos daring people to end him and, well, it finally happened. His life kind of reminds me of the movie Menace to Society. The MC in that movie was a bad dude who by the end of the movie was going to try to turn his life around, but other people who he did wrong in the past did not forget the things he did and he got ended for it. I said this back when it happened and still firmly believe it. X's death was a tragedy because it gave his fans a free pass to absolve him of any and all guilt. If you say anything bad about him now, you're in the wrong for speaking ill of the dead. No, I just think it's disingenuous to insinuate that XXXTentacion was a good person because his life was unexpectedly cut short. The dude was a genuine piece of crap and on his way to prison if not for his untimely passing. Just because you choose to identify with his emo crap doesn't change that fact. Story 9. I hate saying it because I used to really like him, but on 2 occasions, Paul Walker dated young girls. Once when he was 28 and again when he was 32. This was all while he had a young daughter of his own. I guess being a predator is okay though, if you're really good looking. When the famous person is attractive and doesn't appear to be a creepy old man, people don't really say anything when they know they're with minors. The only exception to this is James Franco since the girl showed the world their exchanges. Weirdly, it seems like before the 2000s and even a bit in the 2000s, dating very young women wasn't viewed as particularly weird. Johnny Depp and Winona Ryder started dating when she was 16 or 17, and he was in his late 20s. They were like #goals. Jerry Seinfeld was in his late 30s, dating a girl who was no older than 18. They were treated like a normal couple. Obviously, 18 is legal, but that's weird as heck, even so. Story 10. Here's a few. Number 1. I've worked for Prince, and it's not a so-hidden secret he was absolutely awful to work with. There used to be a saying, "You're nobody in this industry until you've been fired by Prince." He's a legend for sure, but was awful to those who put the show on, and his ego was out of control. For someone who was so quick to fire anyone over a simple mistake, and he's so critical of weakness, it turns out he had some weaknesses of his own. Also, from all accounts, Jim Morrison was an awful, awful person. 2. Johnny Carson. He cheated on his wives and was an all-around jerk when he wasn't on camera. The most widely known example was him telling Joan Rivers that she'd never become the star of The Tonight Show. She was the permanent guest host at the time, then refusing to ever speak to her again after she got a job elsewhere. Number 3. Dr. Seuss. Had an affair for years while his wife battled cancer. Drove her to end it all. Married the woman he'd been having the affair with a couple months later. Number 4. Frank Lloyd Wright. He's seen as a visionary in architecture, but he was a horrible person IRL. Raging narcissist. Abandoned his wife and kids to run off with the wife of one of his clients, nailed down his selected furniture in a client's home because he didn't like what the client wanted, etc. Number 5. Ray Charles. Made children all over the place and refused to acknowledge them. 6. Jerry Lewis. He treated his family like crap, cut his kids out of his well, and was a real jerk on set. Watch some clips on YouTube of him and his behavior. Terrible. Most likely stemming from when he and Dean Martin split from being Martin and Lewis. Everyone thought Dean would disappear and Jerry would go on to be a massive star. As it turned out, it was the complete reverse. It was a bitter, bitter person. Number 7. Coco Chanel. Number 8. Kobe Bryant. He did good things later in his life after betraying his wife and family. Number 9. Stanley Kubrick. Although the way he treated Shelley Duvall during the production of The Shining is widely known, people who think there's nothing more to cinema than what Kubrick did, tend to brush it off when they talk about him. He was well known for treating his actors like crap, but he has been glorified. Glorification is understandable though, not justified, to a point where his shortcomings are completely eclipsed by his popular persona of a mad genius. Number 10. Jimmy Savile. Absolute monster. His celebrity as an English radio and TV personality? Beware if you go on to read more about him. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you made it this far, I'm sure you'll also enjoy. Have you met a celebrity who was actually an IRL? Story 2 is shocking. See you in that video.